So we are back here for the last order of our marine mammals, which is order Cetacea. And I will actually probably break this lecture up into the two groups of cetaceans, which is going to be the toothed whales and then the baleen whales, as you can see here. So our toothed whales are going to contain our dolphins and our porpoises, also our things like orcas and beluga whales. And then we have our baleen whales, which are going to be things like your blue whales and your humpback whales. So we'll talk about those different groups of order Cetacea. So again, cetaceans are always one of students' kind of favorites in terms of marine mammals because who doesn't love whales and dolphins, right? So let's get into the kind of nitty-gritties of order Cetacea. So again, this is our largest group of marine mammals, which includes, again, our toothed whales and our baleen whales. So this is going to include our whales, our dolphins, and our porpoises. These guys have very streamlined hydrodynamic bodies, again, very efficient for swimming. They do have front limbs, which are, again, have evolved in the form of flippers. However, they lack rear limbs as an adult altogether. So there are no rear limbs as an adult. They do have nostrils, which are considered to be called blowholes on the top of the head. And we'll talk about your baleen whales actually have two blowholes, and then your toothed whales will only have one blowhole in the top of the head. And that's one of the ways that you can identify whether or not you have a baleen whale versus a toothed whale. Most mammals, again, have nostrils on the front of the head, on the anterior end. And so this is, again, an evolutionary adaptation for cetaceans to have the nostrils migrate to the top of the head, which is, again, where we call them blowholes now. But those blowholes are basically, again, their nostrils. And they do have a horizontal tail called a fluke. This is different than what you're going to see in your like your cartilaginous fish, which they look very similar to. But if you remember, your cartilaginous fish have a vertical tail, that heterocircle tail that we talked about. So again, very different than your fish. Also, again, if you look at even your bony fish, again, they have this vertical tail instead of the horizontal tail that we call a fluke in your cetaceans. So what's interesting is that when you look at cetaceans, they do have a pelvis, or they at least have the pelvic bones. And so our pelvic bones, we associate, again, with being support for our rear limbs. You know, we have a pelvis that supports our lower limbs. So in whales, they have these pelvic bones, but yet they have no rear limbs. And so this is one of the pieces of evidence that we have for this hypothesis that cetaceans actually evolved from a four-limbed terrestrial ancestor. And so we have quite a significant kind of a robust fossil record for cetaceans. So there is significant fossil evidence to support this idea that cetaceans likely evolved from some four-limbed terrestrial ancestor. And that ancestor likely looked something like this. So again, this was from fossil records, kind of the evolutionary ancestor that we've kind of traced whales and cetaceans back to in terms of, again, this four-limbed terrestrial ancestor that, again, is likely one of the, ancestors that whales and dolphins initially kind of evolved from. And the other piece of evidence that we have for this idea that cetaceans evolved from some four-limbed terrestrial ancestor is the fact that the fetus, if you actually look at the fetus, which they have done using, ultrasound images and things like that with these whales and dolphins, that have been in theme parks and things like that. And so you can see that this very distinctly, this fetus will have 4 limb buds. It's just that the rear limbs fail to ever develop into anything farther. So you can see here, this is what your fetus of, a whale or dolphin will look like. And it has these rear limb buds that just never develop any further. And so, again, they don't fail to develop into those rear limbs. So again, lots of evidence to support this idea that cetaceans evolved from a 4-limbed terrestrial ancestor. And it's that interesting idea, again, that mammals, very well adapted to land, right? Then reinvaded and very successfully reinvaded this marine environment. And really, if you look at it, cetaceans, along with sirenians, are the ones that really have made the most complete transition to aquatic life, and that they don't need to hole out on land at all, not to reproduce, not for breeding. So again, they maintain this completely aquatic lifestyle. So again, they spend their entire lives in the water. And sirenians, again, do this. Your manatees and dugongs do this as well. And then when you look at cetaceans, they do have this blubber that we talked about. Again, we talked about this in the pinnipeds, that provides insulation, it provides buoyancy, it provides this great food reserve. And because they have very little body here, they really need this blubber in terms of providing insulation. Also, again, as they break down that blubber and they break down that fat, and use that energy reserve, it releases heat when they break it down. So again, many benefits to this blubber. Now, when we talk about the fact that your whales and your dolphins have these incredibly streamlined hydrodynamic bodies, very well adapted again to a marine aquatic lifestyle. And so they look very similar to a shark. Or even, a penguin. And so, but when we talk about penguins and dolphins, even though they have these very streamlined body lines, they evolved from very different lineages. And so we call this when different species develop these very similar lifestyles and have evolved these similar traits because they're inhabiting the same types of habitats. However, they evolved through different lineages. We call this convergent evolution. And the reason, again, we know that they evolved through different lineages is that we know that dolphins evolved from some 4-limbed terrestrial ancestor. And we also know, again, that they have lungs, right? Versus fish have gills. They're warm-blooded. Fish are primarily ectothermic, porchiothermic. They're homeotherms. They have hair and produce milk. That's a big one, produce milk for their young. And these guys do not. So again, huge differences in terms of their physiology. However, if you were to look at them, they look very similar. And the reason for that is that they just evolved through these different lineages, evolved from different ancestors. And they evolved these similar body plans because that's what allowed them to be successful in a marine aquatic environment. So again, you can evolve these similar body plans. And this is where it becomes very important when you're talking about these phylogenetic evolutionary trees, to not make these trees, to not base these trees just on appearance alone. Because again, when you start to look at some of the details, the internal physiology, things like that, these species are very different from each other. And you look at genetically, they're quite different from each other. And so looking now, we have the ability to use DNA to be able to create these phylogenetic trees. And this has really helped us in terms of looking at genetic relationships and how organisms are related and where they likely evolved from. So very kind of interesting. But yes, this is called convergent evolution, where there was an ancestor here that sharks evolved from and a very different ancestor that your whales and dolphins evolved from. So we call that convergent evolution. Again, convergent evolution just means that you have the evolution of a similar body plan through 2 very different ancestors. So we talked about all those. I'm just going to kind of cruise through those. So when we look at cetaceans, again, cetaceans are typically divided into two groups. We have our toothless filter feeding whales that we call our baleen whales. And then we have our toothed carnivorous whales that are going to include our dolphins and our porpoises and things like orcas. So this lecture is primarily going to focus on this suborder of our toothed whales. And then the second half of this lecture will be on our baleen whales. So we break this order Cetacea up into two suborders. The suborder Mysticidea, which is going to be your baleen whales, and the suborder Odontoceti, which is going to be your toothed whales. Now, this is pretty easy to remember because if you think of like the orthodontist, right, you can think of tooth or orthodont, odont means tooth. So these are your toothed whales, and the suborder, it's nice that the suborder kind of, hopefully will make sense to you then. They do only have one blowhole, so it's really important to be able to distinguish that what your toothed whales are just going to have one blowhole and your baleen whales are going to have two. So really important, hence, that you know this for the exam. Obviously, again, your toothed whales have these teeth that are very well adapted for a diet of fish, squid, and other prey. And they will use those teeth to kind of pierce through their prey when they catch it, and then they swallow their prey whole. Again, the food, there you go, the food is swallowed whole. And these guys do use sophisticated echolocation. We'll talk about this. Very similar to, again, the echolocation that bats use. So kind of nature's version of sonar to be able to hunt down their prey. So dolphins, of course, are in this category, and porpoises are also in this category. So we'll talk about both dolphins and porpoises. And again, they have these peg-like teeth. They have a dorsal fin that's going to curve to the posterior, and they have this pointed beak-like snout. We're going to talk about how porpoises tend to have a blunt snout. So we'll talk about in just a minute the difference between dolphins and porpoises. No, actually, we'll talk about it right now. So if you look here, these are some of this. This is just a drawing that a student had put together, but it's actually a really great drawing of the differences between dolphins and porpoises. So if you look at this beak business, as they say here, that's one of the key characteristics that you're looking at a dolphin here. And also, if you look at this dorsal fin, it's very pointed, and it kind of also arcs backward. It curves backward a little bit here. Typically, your dolphins are a little bit larger, but that's difficult to identify when they're not right next to each other. But again, they're typically a bit larger. And another notable difference they tell you here is that social groups of porpoises are not nearly as large or close-knit as the social groups of dolphins are going to be. Another big key difference here is that if you looked in the mouth of a dolphin, you'll see a dolphin has these really pointed peg-like teeth, very cone-shaped at the end of them, versus porpoises, and I'll show you this in just a minute, are going to have these kind of spade-shaped, flat, rounded edge to them teeth. Again, differences here, instead of having that elongated beak that you'll see kind of a beak-like snout on your dolphins. Instead, your porpoises are going to have a blunt snout here, more blunt snout. Again, this dorsal fin also has kind of a different shape as well. It's usually smaller, a little less pointed, and usually doesn't arc back as much. So again, those are some major differences. And then here you can actually see the teeth here. So can you identify which is which? So yes, this is the dolphin, okay? And you can see those kind of very sharp, pointed peg-like teeth. And then look at that dorsal fin. See how that dorsal fin is really pointed and arcs backward, okay, towards the posterior end. So it kind of forms this kind of lunate shape right here, very kind of lunar shape. And then here you'll see your porpoise. Look at those teeth on the porpoise. Again, kind of rounded, more spade-like and flat. And then here you can see that dorsal fin is very different, not nearly as pointed, doesn't really arc back, doesn't have that kind of lunate shape to it. So that's an easy way if you're looking, if this is all you get to see here, that may be all you get to see, whether or not you have a dolphin or a porpoise. Now this just shows you in the order of size, the differences in size between these guys. So here you can see the dolphin, quite large, and then porpoise is a bit smaller. So this is a bottlenose dolphin, and then a harbor porpoise. And this guy here is a dolphin fish. I just put that there, dolphin fish. I like this diagram because I like to remind you that a dolphin fish is not a dolphin at all. It is, again, it's also called mahi-mahi. If you're ordering it somewhere, mahi-mahi is usually kind of the term they use on the menu. Or dolphin fish. And again, it's a fish. It is not a dolphin at all. No association to dolphin, not even close to a mammal, right? So I always like to make sure that you know that dolphin fish is fish and not a dolphin. So, but you can see the size difference too, even, you know, a porpoise. Your dolphin fish is quite large for a fish, don't get me wrong, but not as large as a porpoise. Okay. So toothed whales, again, our toothed whales are going to include our dolphins and our porpoises along with our sperm whales, which is going to be our largest of the toothed whales. This is Moby Dick, what the story Moby Dick was written about, a sperm whale. And then our killer whales or orcas as well. So you can see here are just a few of the species of toothed whales, but please keep in mind that this is just a representation of some toothed whales. There are about 80 different species of toothed whales. So again, this is just kind of a small representation of some of our toothed whales. So you can see spinner dolphins, Dall's porpoise, common dolphin, beluga whale, narwhal, sperm whales, the Cuvier's beaked whale, pilot whales, orcas, vaquito, which we'll talk a bit about, and then the harbor porpoise. What's interesting to talk about when we talk about our dolphins and our porpoises, our toothed whales in general, and just whales in general, any of your whales or cetaceans are actually going to be born tail first. And so we would consider this to be breech, right? But for them, this is the normal order of events. This is how things have to be. And the reason is that when they give birth, the birthing process is you know, not quick, because they do have a very large, you know, baby to birth out. And so the challenge is that if they were born head first, the umbilical cord would actually be snapped off way too early in delivery, and the baby would likely drown. Because again, remember that these are air-breathing mammals. And so for us, we get to take our first breath as soon as we come out, right? But these guys are born into the water. Being born tail first will allow the umbilical cord to snap at the very end of the birthing process, allowing that baby to continue to receive oxygen during the birthing process until the very end, when that umbilical cord snaps, and then mom can very quickly push that baby up to the surface. So that's why they are born tail first. Now this is kind of interesting. Your toothed whales will do something called porpoising, and this is where they do this kind of high-speed surfacing, where they kind of pierce out of the water and do these kind of long jumps out of the water, and then they're alternated with these swimming very shallow and close to the surface, and then again propelling themselves up again. And the reason that they do this is it's actually a way in which they can kind of conserve energy. So if they're swimming at high speeds for a long distance, they actually, when they're in the air, they're expending very little energy. And the energy that they save while they're in the air is actually worth the energy expenditure to push them out of the water. So porpoising is a way for them to conserve energy when they're moving at higher speeds. What's interesting is if you watch Formula One racing, they actually named kind of the up and down movement of these cars on the race tracks as they're moving at high speeds. They call it porpoising as well. So that's like a new term for F1 racing. And they get that term. I had to put this here because they get that term, porpoising, from what these porpoises and whales and dolphins actually do when they swim at high speeds here. So kind of interesting. So let's talk now about echolocation. So echolocation is again, nature's kind of version of sonar that's used by our toothed whales. And it's used by our toothed whales that are predatory, and they're feeding again on things like squid and fish. And so they use this echolocation to be able to better identify and track where their prey item is. So dolphins will echolocate by emitting these bursts of sound waves through these little basically these air sacs. And the air is actually going to be pushed through these kind of internal air passages. And at the very end of those little internal air passages are these, what look like these little like lip-like flaps that are often called the monkey lips. So they'd be kind of right at the end of these little air-like passages. And what they do is as air is forced through those flaps, it'll make a noise. And that noise is, again, these clicks. So as air is pushed through the monkey lips, it'll make this click-like sound. And I'll show you an example of this in an animation here. And so those clicks are then focused through what's called the melon. So this structure here is called the melon, and it's filled with this oil that we oftentimes call spermaceti. And that oil will help to focus those clicks. So those clicks then can be echoed through the melon and then out into the ocean and create, again, those vibrations and echolocation clicks in the water column. So they can transmit those vibrations and echolocation clicks into the water column through that melon. Now, what they'll do then is they will receive, so as those echolocation clicks move through the water and hit a prey item, then they will bounce back, right? So they'll bounce off of that target, bounce back to the toothed whale, and the toothed whale can then pick up those vibrations mostly through the bottom jaw here. So again, they have some sensory to be able to pick up those vibrations through the bottom jaw, and then some sensory here up in the very bottom of the melon. Those vibrations will then be transmitted back to what's called the acoustic window of the inner ear, and then that information will then be taken to the brain through, again, nerves. So, and transmitted to the brain through nerves. So, again, this is a way of doing echolocation, very similar to how, again, bats are doing echolocation. It's just that they're doing it in aquatic medium here versus, versus the air like a bat. And so your medium is just different. But what's very interesting here, I want you to notice, is that if you look here, the melon is actually up front here. So most people, when they look at whales and dolphins, they think that the brain is actually right up here, but it's not. If you look, the brain is way back here, posterior actually of the blowholes. So again, if you look, the brain is going to be behind the blowholes. That's a very important point that I really want you guys to know, because most people don't know that. So again, up here, and this is a very important part of their physiology, right? They need this melon to be able to do the echolocation. So their brain has to be pushed back, and it's behind the blowhole. So kind of interesting. Let's see. I do have a video for you on echolocation, of course.
After the dolphin takes a breath at the surface, air returns from the lungs to a series of nasal air sacs located below the blowhole. Although it varies between dolphins, there are four main pairs of air sacs. The nasal sacs are used to manipulate air pressure inside the spiracular cavity and as acoustic mirrors, redirecting sound forward. The current
So, okay, there's a little bit more information than you need to know. I just wanted to show you the very basic idea. You don't have to know any more than what I have on my slide, but I just wanted you to see kind of how echolocation works, just because it's nice to know the process and how it works.
hypothesis attributes primary sound production to the monkey lips dorsal bursa complex.
So here's the monkey lips I talked about.
Each bursa lies slightly below a ridge that protrudes into
monkey
the
lips.
spiracular cavity. These ridges are the monkey lips.
Because they push air up.
Pressure from streams of air bubbles released up the spiracular cavity from the lungs through the complex cause the anterior and posterior monkey lips to slap together. It is believed that the posterior monkey lips slap the anterior monkey lips like a hammer striking an anvil. The clicking vibrations are transferred to the dorsal bursa and passed on to the melon.
Melon here. So here's the melon.
The melon is an organ made up of specialized lipids that facilitate acoustic propagation of sound transferred from the monkey lips dorsal bursa complex.
So kind of amplify that
The
sound.
clicks are organized into a beam as it travels through the melon. Once the sound is emitted from the melon and into the environment, it bounces off an object and returns as a series of echoes to the dolphin's mandible. Like the melon, specialized fatty tissues within the jaw region serve as the primary route for picking up sound and transferring it to the middle and inner ears.
So again, echolocation, just cool, right? I mean, especially because it's a sense. Sorry, I'm going to plug back in here. Because sensory, a sensory organ that we don't have, and it's hard for us to even imagine what it might be like to be able to hear, right, our world with echolocation. So really, really cool. I'm always fascinated by echolocation. I don't know about you guys. So let's just talk about some of a few. Again, we're not going to talk about all 80 species of our toothed whales. So I just picked some representative toothed whales to talk about in terms of, they're just kind of interesting. I picked some that have some really different morphology so that you can kind of follow the different morphology between them. But if you want to know more, of course, there is lots of information out there, and I have some links to places that you can go and look for more information. So we're going to talk about narwhals. Again, narwhals are just interesting because they have this really long horn, which is actually really a tooth. So you'll hear it called a horn or a tusk, but again, it's really just this elongated tooth. And narwhals typically, again, live in the high Arctic, so they're in these cooler waters. So again, adult males and also some females will have these long, elongated single tooths. And so you'll see it grows out through the upper lip. Many of the males will use these long horns and kind of these like sparring sword fight type activities, obviously in terms of mate selection, for, fighting for the right to females. So these guys also are typically kind of very elusive. So again, there's not a lot of sightings of narwhals, and you're lucky to get to see one in your lifetime. They are believed to not be endangered, but again, it's really hard for us in terms of they're very cryptic in the first place to really tell what's happening with their numbers, because we don't have a good record of their numbers anyway. There are, again, many females don't have this long tooth, but there is a small percentage of the females that do have the tusk, again, or tooth. And yeah, this single tooth actually grows out through the upper lip. Again, the function is still unknown. Obviously, we do know that males will use it to spar with other males. There is some good evidence. I'll show you a video in just a minute that they can use it to stun their prey. But there's also some pretty decent evidence based on looking at the morphology of these horns, since some of these horns, again, in narwhals that have died, or they found these horns just on their own, and so they started to look at the physiology of them. And recent data actually indicates that the horn itself has some sensory organs, has quite a bit of nervous tissue in it that indicates that it might be sensitive to things like temperature changes. It may be sensitive to pressure changes. So this could help be an indicator of depth. And then they believe it also may have some sensory for changes in salinity as well. So kind of interesting. This horn is a little more complicated, I think, than we truly understand yet. And we just simply don't have enough information to be able to tell. So this is some footage to show how they use this horn tooth to be able to stun some prey. So check this Sorry, that's quite loud. So kind of rapidly tap it through the water. And there you can see some of those fish kind of briefly stun, which is pretty interesting. You can watch them continually do this over and over in this video. So just kind of interesting, some interesting kind of more recent evidence that these narwhals will do this behavior to stun their prey with their using. So again, really interesting. Just an interesting cetacean in general. So beluga whales, when we talk about beluga whales, they again primarily live in the Arctic here. And these guys, you can see they will make these kind of migrations back and forth again for feeding purposes, and then they'll come back again into these. You can see into some of these waters here up in Alaska, oftentimes for breeding purposes and to calf. But they have to be, quite careful as they come into these areas, because as winter hits, as colder times hit, these belugas, if they get trapped in the ice, then they have to continually keep open these breathing holes, and they generally just wear themselves out and starve. So it can be quite dangerous for these beluga whales. But again, they're pretty easy to identify. They have, again, their melon up here is quite large and pronounced. They're all white, and they're just an interesting species to be able to see. Sperm whales, these are the largest by far of our toothed whales. And these guys are typically, again, predators of the deep, as you probably well know. The largest sperm whale on record is like 42 tons, which is just kind of hard to even fathom, right? And they like to dive to these really deep depths to feed on their favorite food, which is the giant squid. They also will feed on fish, including sharks, sometimes lobsters, and other marine mammals. But again, their favorite food is the giant squid. So sperm whales will hunt using echolocation. And if you look, sperm whales, remember again, the melon is actually up here. And so they have this really large kind of version of the melon. And the oil inside there is something that has been coined spermaceti. And early whalers kind of thought that it was the oil inside there was sperm because it would turn white when it solidified. So that's how it got its name, spermaceti. Now, what's pretty cool, and this is really important in terms of sperm whales, is that there are blood vessels that run alongside that melon, right? And what's interesting is whales can actually regulate the density of the oil in that melon to increase or decrease its density. And they can do this by, if they dilate the blood vessels surrounding that melon, then they have that warm blood. The warm blood, as the blood vessels dilate surrounding that melon, will help basically turn the oil to more of a liquid form. And then if those blood vessels constrict, then the oil will cool and solidify. And so they can use that in terms of density, right? So they can cool and solidify more of that oil in their melon if they're diving down deep, right? And then if they're coming up to the surface, they can dilate those blood vessels and warm that oil and make it less dense. In terms of making it a little more buoyant, right? So kind of interesting, really interesting in terms of how whales can use this oil up in their melon. So really quick, there's a video. I'm not going to play the whole thing because it's pretty complicated. I just want you to be able to see some of the structures. Sperm whales at this level in terms of understanding echolocation.
Over a quarter of the whale's body.
But I wanted to show you what the spermaceti looks like.
This spermaceti oil-filled giant sac makes up over a quarter of the whale's body.
It's massive.
So the click ripples through the spermaceti to the skull, which is shaped like a radar dish. It helps reflect the click back down through the nose and out into the dark world. By listening to the clicks returning like a sonar, this enormous nose allows the sperm whale to navigate worlds we can only imagine. Here is the key to the sperm whale's titanic song. Hidden deep inside its head is a second nasal passage that shares the single nostril. When air runs through the monkey lips, it makes them slap together.
Lips right here.
This is what makes the sound of the whale's click. It's an extraordinary example of evolution. One part of its nose breathes, the other sings.
So again, just kind of interesting in terms of, you can watch more of this video. They get into really the nitty gritties on how this process works, and it's quite complex. You don't have to know that at the level, but if you just want to watch it, it's quite fascinating in terms of how complicated echolocation is in sperm whales. So again, these guys squid, but they also feed on fish, lobsters, and sometimes even other marine mammals, even things like pinnipeds. Just to kind of show you some really basic, real quick here, that many of your toothed whales are adapted for these long, deep dives. And so one of the things they can do is this apneustic breathing, where they'll do these like really rapid breaths. I'm sure you've seen people that are doing the deep dives. They're just free diving. You've probably seen them do this. They'll do these rapid, deep breaths. But in our marine mammals, they have special adaptations for this. It's actually much more beneficial in them than it is in us. And so they do these rapid breaths followed by this exhalation before they dive. And what that will do is that will actually kind of hyperoxygenate their blood. And then as they they exhale, okay, that'll decrease the air in the lungs to decrease their buoyancy. So that way then they can dive more rapidly. And that's okay because again, they've hyperoxygenated their blood and they have the surface area to do that more so than we do. So then as they dive down deep, you'll see blood circulation to like your non-vital organs. The blood vessels will constrict and that blood circulation is reduced to those areas. And then sent primarily to the vital organs, which is the brain and the heart. So they kind of shunt blood to those vital organs, the brain and the heart. They do reduce their heart rate, so that will reduce their oxygen demand as well as they dive down. And again, they're kind of basically sinking because they released a lot of that air from their lungs. They do have these special muscles with this protein called myoglobin. And so that myoglobin will hold on to oxygen, just like our hemoglobin does, but it'll hold on to oxygen in their muscles and help to kind of temporarily store that oxygen as they're diving deep. The rib cage again will collapse to expel air in the lungs and kind of reduce some of the absorption of nitrogen. We're not going to get too much into that, but if you're a diver, you know about the impacts of nitrogen. And then they have more blood and a higher concentration of red blood cells to kind of maximize oxygenation throughout the body. So just kind of interesting, a couple different cool physiological adaptations. Again, apneutic breathing for them, much, much more effective for them than it is for us in terms of benefits for doing these deep dives. This is that spermaceti. This is how a sperm whale is going to produce and receive sound. And again, it has this large organ that's called the spermaceti organ, which is basically the melon in your sperm whales. And so again, they have, and then here you can see they have the these nasal passages and then the monkey lips. The monkey lips are here at the very, so just a little bit different in terms of their physiology for echolocation. Now we cannot have this lecture and not talk about ambergris or ambergris, pronounced both ways. Most of us say ambergris. And so what is ambergris? You have to know because this is too awesome. So ambergris is basically whale vomits. So why wouldn't we capitalize on whale vomit, right? I mean, whale vomit, of course, is valuable, right? So that's what we're going to
$1 billion for your vomit? Yeah, man. Maybe if you were a sperm whale. Hey everyone, I'm Lacey Green. Welcome to D News. Picture this. You're walking along the beach and your dog draws you to this nice-sized rock along the beach. It smells horrible and has a strange sort of texture, so you think to yourself, you know what? This is the 21st century. I'm gonna Google it. And when you do, you find out that it's actually whale vomit. But as if that wasn't good enough news, you then go on to learn that whale vomit is actually worth thousands of dollars per pound. Best news ever. So this happened to a dude in Lancashire. He found a 6-pound lump of whale vomit walking along the beach, and now he's gonna cash in about 150 G at the bank. This happened a few years ago in Australia too. A couple found a lump and cashed in nearly $300,000. And who is putting down the big bucks on this stinky lump of hardened intestinal slurry? Why, it's perfume companies. Makes total sense, right? No, it doesn't. Until you learn that the fragrance industry isn't actually after the whale vomit for the smell. It's for the ability to stick the perfume scent to human flesh. It's a fixative. It helps preserve the perfume blend by slowing its evaporation off of your skin. It has a fancy name too. Ambergris? Yes, I think that's the one. Ambergris comes from sperm whales, which are endangered, which is why ambergris is actually illegal in the US. Out here we use other synthetic fixatives. It's mostly French perfume companies who stock the natural whale puke. But the French aren't the only ones to prize this stuff. Ancient Egyptians used ambergris for incense, and these days they use it to scent cigarettes. In the Middle Ages, it was used as a treatment for headaches, and during the Black Death, people believed that carrying around a ball of ambergris protected them from the plague. The pungent smell covered the scent of the air, which is what people thought was causing the plagues. So we've come a long way since the Black Death. So ambergris does serve an important function in our spermy whale friends. The beaks of giant squids have been found embedded within lumps of ambergris, so scientists have theorized that it comes from the whale's intestinal tract to ease the passage of hard, sharp objects that the whale might eat. And although people still call it whale vomit, it's probable that ambergris comes out both ends, with the biggest pieces coming out through the mouth. Lovely visual, that one. When the whale ejects ambergris into the sea, the amber gray material hardens as it bobs along on the ocean. Sometimes it'll be floating along at sea for years before it's found, and in that time the salty water gives it a sort of waxy texture. So, if you're walking along the beach and you're able to identify some, just remember your friends at D News who told you what was up. So guys,
Okay, so again, I like that video. She does a pretty good job of telling you what ambergris is. So again, this is oftentimes whale vomit. The largest pieces, again, as she said, are going to come out the mouth. It's whale vomit. And basically, this is just because sperm whales are feeding on, things like these giant squid. They have these undigested squid beaks and other debris that kind of accumulates in their gut and could actually damage their digestive tract. So they produce this sticky glob of oily material called ambergris. And again, it really helps to protect their digestive tract from those sharp objects like your giant squid beaks. Now, this is kind of interesting. Here is, so more recently, these Yemeni fishermen found a 280-pound chunk of whale vomit. They did find a sperm whale carcass on the beach, and they did have to actually kind of cut through that carcass and dig through that carcass, but they found a really large chunk, 280-pound chunk of ambergris, and because of that, they were awarded $1.5 million. So really changed the life of these fishermen here. So again, just kind of interesting stories in terms of things that we harvest from whales. Who knew whale vomit, right? Okay, so we're going to wrap things up with orcas, and then we're going to talk about an endangered porpoise called the vaquita. So killer whales or orcas are, again, known to feed upon seals. You probably know this: penguins, fishes, sea otters, and even other whales. There's lots of videos of them doing this. And they appear to use their white bellies. They'll kind of flash it and frighten heron schools, believe it or not. They have these really strong flukes, also that they'll use to stun fish and seal pups. And you primarily find your orcas in colder waters. Now, what's interesting is that DNA analysis confirms several different, what we think are now subspecies, possibly even different species of orcas with distinct appearances, with distinct hunting habits and diets. And some of these distinct hunting habits come from the fact that the orcas have these very strong social bonds. And so we'll see that kind of development of different hunting habits within these kind of orca families. So when we look at orcas, there are different subspecies. There's what we think again are different subspecies now. There's one group, pods in Antarctica, that have learned to make waves to knock seals off floating ice. So that's one way that they will hunt. In places like Patagonia, they found some of the pods there will actually come on the shore, and you've probably seen this in some of David Attenborough's videos. They'll actually partially beach themselves to catch some of those resting sea lion pups. And the techniques in one of the Attenborough videos, they'll show you I think this is in one of the more recent ones. But they will show that like a mother will actually have to teach, her offspring how to do that. So that's passed on from generation to generation. So these hunting habits are passed on down through these kind of families or pods of orcas. There are other pods that will work as teams to kind of herd and ambush dolphins. Others will herd schools of herring into these really tight balls and push them all the way up to the surface and then feed on them. And then some of them will even work as a pod to take down a calf, something like a gray whale calf. And what they'll do is they'll typically swim alongside the mom and the calf to wear out the calf, because the calf will wear out much more rapidly than the mother, especially a young calf. And then what they'll do is they'll quickly use the pod. They'll work together to separate the mom from the baby, because the mom is obviously much more dangerous to them because she has such a large fluke. She could actually kill an orca with one slap of her fluke. So they'll use the pod to separate the mom from the baby calf, and then what they'll do is they'll quickly hop on top and drown that baby calf. So again, very interesting. They all have different pods will have these different hunting habits and feeding strategies. So orcas become really interesting in terms of looking at these advanced behaviors that they have. Very advanced behaviors, and especially the fact that they have these social behaviors and very strong social bonds within the pod. Killer whales also do this activity called spy hopping. I'll show you a quick video here that they use to be able to kind of come up to the surface and kind of basically sneak a peek of their surroundings. So kind of interesting behavior that these orcas will do. Tail slapping there too. So there's some spy hopping right there. Spy hopping. Spy hopping. So they do it so frequently that we have a name for it called spy hopping. Spy hopping. And again, tail slapping is another thing. Sometimes they think they do tail slapping to be able to, again, communicate, to get parasites off. They'll slap their tail. But again, they're not really sure. They can use it to stun prey. There's all kinds of reasons why they might tail slap. And again, scientists really don't know. It's probably a combination of some of those. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to talk about is the vaquita porpoise. And this one is, it's kind of a sad story, especially for me, because when I started teaching marine biology 15 years ago, and I wrote this lecture, you'll see at one point in the lecture, I had originally, and I had just kind of updated it, but I had originally had that there were less than 300 vaquita in the wild at the time. And sadly, now in 2022, we believe that there are only about 10 vaquita. So this is a species that I have seen drastically reduced in numbers in just the time period that I've been teaching, and likely to become extinct within our lifetime. So this is by far the most endangered cetacean in the world. It doesn't live far away from you. These guys are endemic to the upper Gulf of California in what's called the Sea of Cortez here. And so endemic means, they are only found in this northern Gulf of California area. That's it. So you can see that vaquita is the world's smallest porpoise. The name actually means little cow, And again, they are the Earth's most endangered marine cetacean right now, with a population of only about 10 individuals. So again, here you can see this is even outdated. Here is population of 30. They now are pretty certain that the population is 10 or below. And one of the main reasons for the reduction in the vaquita population is entanglement in fishing gear. And they're killed basically incidentally in the gill net fishing gear for a also critically endangered fish called the totoba. And the totoba is unfortunately illegally fished because it is also endangered and illegal to fish. So it is illegally fished for its swim bladder and liver, which is then sold to China, where it's believed to have these medicinal powers. So sadly, again, the overfishing of the totoba has led to the severe decline in the vaquita, because the totoba actually is endemic to the same area. It's endemic to this upper Gulf of California. So that's where all of these fishing boats with the gill nets for catching that are. And sadly, the vaquita get trapped in these gill nets, and because they are an air-breathing mammal, they basically drowned in these gill nets. And so you can see here the population numbers for the vaquita have been crashing for quite a while. And so you can see in 1997, we had about 567. In 2008, when, I was kind of teaching marine biology, we had just under 300. And then now today, sadly, I'm here giving this lecture with probably about a population of 10 or less. So again, it's quite a sad story. The vaquitas are now protected by the Mexican government, but unfortunately likely to be a little too late. And these, they basically really need drastic measures to save this species from going extinct, especially because, when you're looking at a really low population number like this, genetic diversity is really low, and it would be very easy for a disease to come along and completely wipe out the few remaining vaquita. There is an idea to possibly use dolphins to herd the remaining vaquitas to a marine sanctuary, but I put this as risky because, if the vaquitas don't do well in this marine sanctuary, if there is something off, that could completely wipe out the species. So this is really a risk, giant risk to take. So, not really sure what's going to happen in terms of the vaquita populations. Again, the U.S. government has actually taken some stance on this, and they expanded the Mexican seafood ban to help save the vaquita porpoise in March of 2020. So they basically put a seafood ban on shrimp and fish from the northern Gulf of California, because again, that's where they're using gill nets to harvest fish and shrimp. So this is kind of, I'll just play this video and then I'll let you go. You can watch some of the if you'd like to watch this video, it's kind of an interesting video. I'm just going to show you the trailer, but you can watch it through National Geographic. So this is kind of the trailer for something called Sea of Shadows.
This is organized crime.
Mexican narco-traffickers call Totoaba the cocaine of the sea. The fishing of the Totoaba by Chinese traffickers and Mexican cartels is killing the vaquita. The vaquita is getting extinct.
There were 100, and then there were 60, and now there's fewer than 30. Come on, sweetie. Come on, mama.
To stop the killing of the vaquita, we have to take down those traffickers. The whole thing stinks.
It is corruption all the way. Who is the Chapo of the Totoaba?
There's some really bad guys here. They don't want to see us succeed.
So again, it's just kind of, you can, if you're interested, you can watch.
The vaquita, we will lose the most beautiful places on the planet. I keep thinking about the moment when only one vaquita will be left in the wild. This is a war against the extinction of a species.
So again, you can watch this.
Hold on
It's
to the
interesting because it talks about the politics behind the challenges with trying to conserve some of these marine mammals, and this, you know, not only just extends to the vaquita porpoise, but also to some of the challenges of protecting marine mammals worldwide. So it's really kind of an interesting one. You can also click on this link here. I won't play it for you because this lecture has gone so long, but you can click on this link, and they talk a little bit about in 2020 how many vaquitas were left in the world. She talks about the fact that we don't think that there is any more than 10 vaquitas left. And so this is a vaquita researcher. And then you can also kind of read some more information on the actual embargo and ban that the U.S. Has on shrimp and fish from the northern Gulf of California. That was passed again in March of 2020. So kind of interesting information. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Oh, sorry, I have one more. I forgot I had one more. I felt like I couldn't talk about the vaquita and not talk about the Yangtze River dolphin, the baiji. And the reason is that this is a freshwater dolphin that was found only in the Yangtze River in China. And it was our very first cetacean to be declared extinct in 2006 as a result of human activity. So again, there have been a random sighting here and there. They have been really undocumented. They were not documented by researchers. So it's hard to say, but there are these, you know, people out there that have said, I saw a Yangtze River dolphin. And even if they have seen one or two, it's still very likely that the genetic diversity with so few species, so few numbers left, would allow this species to continue. So again, we consider this species to be extinct at this point. So this is the Yangtze River dolphin. And you can watch a little bit of the story here. I can play just a short clip of it here. And this is a nice video clip. If I can't get it to play here, you can always watch it at home, but it's a video clip on basically, and it's put out by, again, the Natural History Museum, so it's a good clip.
The baiji was one of the world's few true river dolphin species. It had very highly developed sonar and very reduced vision because the Yangtze is very murky and full of sediments. The word baiji means white dolphin in Chinese, so it's very pale in colour. In my opinion, it was the most beautiful of the different river dolphin species. The first dolphin surveys in China were conducted in the late 70s and early 80s, and by this stage already the population had fallen to only around 400 animals. By the end of the 20th century, there were possibly only 13 wild dolphins left in the Yangtze.
Yeah.
The EDGE program was established in order to conserve.
So again, they kind of go through and they talk about the EDGE program, so you go to there. But it was just kind of an interesting video. So again, the Yangtze River dolphin was our first cetacean to become extinct as a result of human activity. So I'm going to stop there, and then we will go ahead and talk about the suborder Mysticeti on the next set of